What if a single letter could destroy a family? What if the very words of a father, written to his youngest daughter, became the key piece of evidence that would land her mother behind bars? Imagine opening an envelope from someone you trusted more than anyone else, only to realize that what's inside could change everything you thought you knew about your life, your family, and your future. For Romy Reiner, that nightmare became a reality. And for Tracy Reiner, the mother she loved, it became a path straight to arrest. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. It all began on a quiet Sunday at the sprawling Brentwood estate, a $13.5 million home that had been the family's sanctuary for decades. Rob Reiner, legendary filmmaker and patriarch, had built a life of Hollywood glitz, accolades, and apparent family harmony. Michelle Reiner, his wife, was the quiet but commanding presence who managed the household and held the family together through every storm. On the surface, nothing seemed out of place. But behind closed doors, tensions simmered. Tensions no one outside could have imagined, and no one could have foreseen would explode in such horrific fashion. Romy Reiner, their youngest daughter, had always been close to her father. At just 27, she carried the innocence and trust of youth, but also the growing responsibility of navigating a family that, though celebrated, was far from perfect. That Sunday, she arrived at the estate, expecting an ordinary visit, perhaps a casual brunch or a quiet afternoon with her parents. What she encountered instead was chaos, horror, and the first cracks of a scandal that would rock Hollywood. The bodies of Rob, 78, and Michelle, 70, were discovered in their home. The circumstances were as shocking as they were tragic, but even more shocking was that their son, Nick Reiner, who lived in the guest house on the property, was immediately arrested that very night. He was charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder. The headlines were instantaneous. Social media exploded. Reporters camped outside the estate. Neighbors whispered, and friends struggled to reconcile the loving family they had seen with the unimaginable crime that had occurred behind closed doors. But the real story, the part that most people couldn't see at first glance, began with a letter. A letter Rob Reiner had written, one he intended only for Romy. This letter, hidden away for reasons only Rob could explain, would become the central piece of a puzzle no one expected. It would implicate Tracy Reiner, Romy's mother, in ways that shocked investigators, scandalized Hollywood, and tore the Reiner family apart even further. Now, you might be wondering, how could a letter, something as seemingly simple as pen on paper, wield such power? How could words written from a father to his daughter unravel the bonds of trust and love so completely? The answer lies not just in the words themselves, but in the secrets they exposed. The letter was more than a message. It was a revelation, a confession, and a warning all at once. It hinted at betrayals long buried, conflicts simmering under the surface, and motives that no one had ever suspected. And when Romy opened it, she had no idea that she would become the unwitting key to uncovering a family's darkest truths. From the moment the letter was discovered, investigators saw patterns they hadn't noticed before. Small discrepancies in statements, contradictory timelines, hidden alliances within the family. Every line of the letter was scrutinized, analyzed, and cross-referenced with evidence from the scene. And slowly, a picture began to emerge, a picture that pointed not just to Nick Reiner's involvement, but to Tracy Reiner's potential complicity. Suddenly, what had seemed like a straightforward case of a son turning on his parents was anything but simple. Romy, meanwhile, was thrust into a world she had never anticipated. She had to navigate the shock of discovering her parents' deaths, the reality of her brother's arrest, and the implications of the letter she now held in her hands. Every moment was fraught with tension. Should she speak to investigators immediately? Should she wait? Should she share the letter's contents with anyone at all? Each choice carried weight. Each decision had consequences, and every second that passed added to the suspense that enveloped her life. But the drama didn't stop there. Tracy Reiner, a woman who had seemed untouchable in her poise and social standing, suddenly faced the unthinkable. Arrested in connection with the case, she became a central figure in a story that Hollywood would not stop talking about. Fans, colleagues, and the public struggled to understand how a mother could be implicated in such a terrifying chain of events. Every revelation about her past, every rumor about the family dynamics, and every leak to the press fed the fire of speculation and intrigue. For the audience watching from afar, the story was almost cinematic in its intensity. But for Romy, it was heartbreakingly real. The letter was more than words. It was a burden. It was a map to the truth that no one else could see, a key to secrets hidden deep within the Reiner family. And as the investigation continued, it became increasingly clear that the letter was going to change everything, not just for Tracy and Nick, but for Romy herself. This letter, lost and forgotten for months, might have been intended to guide, protect, or warn. But in the wrong hands, or perhaps in the right hands at the wrong time, it became explosive. What investigators would uncover next would challenge everything Romy thought she knew about her family. Hidden alliances, long-standing grievances, and motives buried beneath years of appearances would start to surface, and the consequences would be devastating. What made this situation even more perplexing was the way the letter seemed almost prophetic. Rob Reiner, in his own words, had outlined tensions and risks that no one fully understood until the tragedy struck. Could he have anticipated the chain reaction his words would set off? Could he have predicted that Tracy Reiner would face arrest, that Romy would be caught in the center of the storm, and that Nick's actions would be seen in a dramatically different light once the letter was revealed? And yet, even as the investigation unfolded, new questions kept arising. Who else knew about the letter? Were there other messages hidden away, waiting to be discovered? Could Romy trust anyone in her family now? And most importantly, what truly motivated the events that led to that fateful Sunday in Brentwood? For viewers, this story is more than a sensational headline. It's a deep dive into family dynamics, trust, betrayal, and the extraordinary power of a single revelation. It's about how the past can reach forward and reshape the present, and how one document, one carefully crafted letter, can have repercussions no one could have imagined. And just when you think you might have a handle on the situation, the truth takes another twist. Because the letter is only the beginning. Its contents, its implications, and the secrets it uncovers are just the first dominoes in a chain of events that will shock Romy, arrest Tracy, and challenge everything Hollywood thinks it knows about the Reiners. What would you do if you walked into your family home, expecting laughter and warmth, only to be greeted by silence so thick it felt like it was pressing against your chest? Romy Reiner faced that question on a quiet Sunday morning at the Brentwood estate, a place that had always been her sanctuary, her safe zone, the backdrop of countless childhood memories. She expected to see her parents bustling about, perhaps arguing playfully over breakfast or sharing a quiet joke. What she found instead would haunt her for the rest of her life. Romy had arrived earlier than usual that morning. Something had tugged at her, a subtle unease she couldn't quite place. Maybe it was the way her phone had stayed silent overnight, the absence of her mother's usual morning messages, or perhaps the nagging feeling that sometimes comes when instincts refuse to be ignored. Whatever it was, it led her to the front door, keys in hand, heart beating just a little faster than normal. She turned the key, pushed the door open, and the first thing she noticed was the quiet. Too quiet. The kind of silence that feels alive, like it's waiting for you to notice something wrong. At first, she thought perhaps her parents were asleep, or maybe they had stepped out briefly. But as she stepped inside, the unease settled into something heavier. The air smelled different, faintly metallic, sharp, something out of place in the usually welcoming scent of home and freshly brewed coffee. The living room was empty. The sunlight spilled across the polished floors, but there were no shadows of her parents moving about. No laughter, no subtle signs of life. Romy's heart began to race. She called out softly, "Mom? Dad?" No answer. She checked the kitchen, the study, the hallways, still nothing. And then she saw it. It wasn't just a feeling anymore. It was reality, raw and undeniable. Her parents' bodies. And the shock of it hit her like a physical blow, knocking the air out of her lungs. Romy couldn't process it at first. Her brain refused to make sense of the scene. It was as though her mind was buffering, trying desperately to load a reality it wasn't ready for. The next moments are a blur. The neighbors' voices calling her name, the distant sirens, the the sudden realization that her brother Nick had been living just steps away in the guest house, and now the horrifying knowledge that he was somehow connected to this nightmare. Was it possible? Could Nick? No, that couldn't be. Not her brother. Not Nick. Yet, by the time the police arrived, the impossible had already taken shape. Nick was arrested that very night, charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. The headlines came almost immediately. Reiner family tragedy. Son arrested after parents found dead. Social media lit up with speculation, accusations, and disbelief. Friends, colleagues, fans, everyone was trying to reconcile the smiling family photos they had seen with the horrific reality now splashed across every screen. For Romy, the chaos outside was nothing compared to the storm raging inside. She felt disbelief, anger, and a profound sense of betrayal. How could this happen in her family? How could the home she had always known as a place of safety turn into a crime scene overnight? And amid all the confusion, there was one element that both terrified and intrigued her more than anything else: the letter. At first glance, it seemed almost innocuous. A plain envelope, tucked away in a drawer she hadn't opened in months. The handwriting was unmistakable, her father's. But what made her pause was the care with which it was sealed. There were no markings, no stamps, no hints of what might be inside. Just the words "for Romy" written in her father's hand. Something in her gut told her this was no ordinary note. It was a warning, a confession, perhaps even a roadmap. And as she held it, trembling, she realized that this single letter might hold the key to understanding everything that had just gone wrong. The police were meticulous. They documented everything in the house, photographing every room, every object. Romy followed them through the rooms, answering questions she barely understood herself. The investigators asked her to recount her last interactions with her parents, her brother, and anyone else who might have been in the house. But how could she explain what she had just seen? How could anyone reconcile the loving family she knew with the crime scene she had stumbled upon? Meanwhile, the world outside had started forming narratives. News anchors speculated endlessly about motive. Social media users theorized about family dynamics, financial disputes, and even Hollywood-style conspiracies. And yet, in the center of it all, Romy felt utterly alone. She couldn't confide in anyone, not her friends, not neighbors, not even her extended family. What she knew about that letter, what she suspected about its implications, was hers alone. As she picked up the envelope for the first time, she noticed subtle details she had never seen before. The slight indentation where her father's hand had pressed too hard on the paper, the faint crease suggesting he had folded it with care, almost reverently. She traced the words "for Romy" with her fingers and felt a strange mix of comfort and dread. What secrets had her father entrusted to her? And why had he hidden them so carefully? The investigation quickly shifted focus as Romy handed over the letter to the authorities. Detectives examined it line by line, scanning for hidden meanings, coded language, and clues about the family's internal tensions. And what they found was explosive: hints of conflicts, veiled warnings, and cryptic references to events that had never come to public attention. The letter, once a private message from a father to his daughter, had suddenly become a key piece of evidence in a murder investigation. Romy's role in the unfolding drama became more complicated with every passing hour. She was no longer just a grieving daughter. She was a witness, a holder of secrets, and the linchpin that might connect the dots between the crime scene, Nick's arrest, and the hidden dynamics within the family. Every time she reread the letter, she found something new. A word, a phrase, a nuance she had overlooked. And each discovery seemed to deepen the mystery, raising more questions than answers. Meanwhile, Tracy Reiner's arrest sent shockwaves through the family and the wider public. A mother, known for her elegance and poise, was now facing legal jeopardy. The connection between her and the letter, between her and the events of that night, became a topic of intense scrutiny. How could the letter implicate her? Was she involved, or had she been set up by the very family she had nurtured? The ambiguity only added to the tension, creating a real-time drama that captivated everyone following the story. As the days turned into weeks, Romy found herself reflecting on every interaction with her parents, every subtle argument or disagreement she had witnessed. Could she have noticed the cracks in their family dynamic sooner? Was there a warning she had missed? And what about Nick? Her brother, her confidant, the one she had always believed would protect the family? Each revelation about his past actions, combined with the contents of the letter, painted a picture that was as terrifying as it was heartbreaking. For the audience watching from home, the story was sensational. For Romy, it was reality, raw, unfiltered, and unbearable at times. And yet, in the midst of grief, confusion, and fear, one thing became clear. The letter was only the beginning. What it revealed would send shockwaves through the investigation, the family, and even Hollywood itself. Every line hinted at secrets that could not remain hidden. Every word suggested motives that no one had suspected, and every pause in the text seemed pregnant with implications that would unravel over the coming days. And just when Romy thought she had reached the limits of what she could bear, a new detail emerged. Hidden within the envelope, beneath the carefully folded letter, was another piece of paper, smaller, less conspicuous, almost easily missed. A note, a postscript, something her father had added at the very last moment. Its contents were brief, cryptic, and chilling. It hinted at dangers that Romy could not yet fully understand, and it suggested that Tracy Reiner's involvement might go deeper than anyone had imagined. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. Have you ever held something so small that it could upend your entire world? Something so simple, a folded piece of paper, that the weight of its meaning presses down on you harder than any physical object ever could? For Romy Reiner, that moment arrived in the quiet aftermath of her parents' deaths. In her hands rested the letter from her father, Rob Reiner, the one he had written to her in secrecy, the one he had intended only for her eyes. She stared at the envelope, unsure whether to open it. Part of her wanted to preserve the last piece of her father's voice, untouched and sacred. Another part, a part gripped by fear and desperate need for answers, wanted to tear it open immediately, to understand what had led to this unimaginable tragedy. The tension was unbearable. She could feel her pulse in her temples, a rhythm that seemed to echo the questions racing through her mind. Why had her father written this? What secrets had he kept hidden all these years? Could the letter contain answers? Or perhaps questions that would only make the nightmare worse? Finally, trembling, Romy slit the envelope. The paper inside was thick, slightly textured, the handwriting familiar, every curve and loop carrying the unmistakable imprint of her father's hand. She unfolded it slowly, as if careful handling might preserve not just the words, but her father himself. The first lines were deceptively calm, almost routine, as though he were writing a casual note about everyday life. But beneath the surface, Romy could sense a tension she had never felt in his words before. Something urgent, almost fearful, pulsed through the sentences. As she read, Romy realized that the letter was more than just words. It was a confession, a warning, a map. Each line hinted at hidden truths, buried conflicts, and long-standing tensions within the family that no one outside could have imagined. Her father wrote of alliances, subtle betrayals, and choices that had consequences far beyond what anyone had realized. And the more Romy read, the more she understood the gravity of the situation. This was not a simple family disagreement laid out on paper. This was a blueprint for understanding a tragedy that had already occurred, and perhaps for predicting what might happen next. The letter spoke of trust and caution. It spoke of actions taken in secret, conversations had behind closed doors, and decisions made that could, if exposed, shatter lives. Romy's hands shook as she traced the words, each sentence a mixture of reassurance and alarm. Her father's voice seemed to echo in the quiet room, calm yet urgent, guiding her toward understanding, urging her to be careful. She could almost hear him speaking directly to her, warning her of dangers she had not yet recognized. But the most shocking part of the letter was not just what her father had written. It was what he had implied. Between the lines, Romy detected hints that someone she trusted, someone who had always seemed protective and caring, might have been complicit in events she was only beginning to piece together. The idea was almost too much to bear. Could it be true? Could Tracy Reiner, her mother, really be involved in something that had led to this chaos? Or had her father been trying to protect her from a misunderstanding, a misinterpretation that could destroy her relationship with her mother forever? As Romy continued to read, she found herself pausing at certain phrases, rereading them over and over. Subtle references to past incidents, to moments she had long forgotten, now seemed to carry a sinister weight. Her father mentioned disagreements, secret meetings, and unspoken threats. And somewhere in the middle of the letter, a line made her stop entirely. It hinted at an event that had never been discussed openly, a turning point in the family's history that she had been shielded from, until now. Her mind raced. Could this? Romy also noticed how the letter's warnings seemed to reflect a prescience about the risks Tracy could face. Rob had written with careful phrasing, hinting that certain actions could be misconstrued or lead to unintended consequences. Was this a protective measure? A plea for caution? Or was it a subtle acknowledgement of a reality Rob himself could not prevent? The ambiguity gnawed at Romy, creating both fear and a sense of duty. She needed to interpret the letter correctly, both to understand her father's intentions and to protect her mother from potential misunderstanding or misjudgment. As days turned into weeks, the investigation revealed more complexities. Forensic evidence, witness statements, and digital communications all intersected with the letter's contents, pointing to a family embroiled in dynamics far more complicated than anyone had initially imagined. Tracy's role remained ambiguous, hovering between maternal innocence and potential involvement. Romy was left to navigate these revelations, balancing her grief with the burden of knowledge and the responsibility of deciphering her father's final message. The more Romy reflected, the more she realized that this wasn't just about legal implications. It was about trust, betrayal, and understanding the intricacies of human behavior. Could Tracy have acted in self-interest, or was she trying to protect the family in ways no one could see? Were the investigators misinterpreting her actions, or was there an unseen layer of truth yet to be revealed? Romy found herself questioning not just her mother, but the nature of truth itself and the ways in which perspective, circumstance, and interpretation could twist reality. And as the layers of the investigation unfolded, Romy began to uncover subtle hints from her father's letter that suggested Tracy's involvement might be more nuanced than anyone suspected. Lines that seemed casual at first now hinted at decisions made in secrecy, at conflicts that had been managed quietly, and at pressures that may have forced choices no outsider could fully understand. The realization was chilling. Tracy's arrest might be just one step in a series of revelations that could alter the family's understanding of loyalty, trust, and morality forever. Have you ever tried to understand someone so close to you, only to realize that the person you thought you knew was almost unrecognizable? For Romy Reiner, and for everyone following the Reiner family tragedy, that question became painfully real as attention turned to Nick Reiner, the son who had lived just steps away in the guest house and who now faced charges for the deaths of his parents. How could someone she had shared childhood memories with, who had been part of family celebrations and milestones, become the central figure in a story of horror and betrayal? Nick had always been a complex figure in the Reiner household. To outsiders, he was charming, articulate, and occasionally enigmatic. The kind of son who could charm adults with ease, navigate Hollywood's social circles effortlessly, and yet remain private about his own struggles. Within the family, however, there had always been tension, subtle friction that Romy had noticed but perhaps ignored as sibling rivalry or the natural push and pull of a family dynamic. There had been arguments, disagreements over choices, and conflicts that seemed to simmer beneath the surface, invisible to anyone not paying close attention. The morning after the tragedy, investigators began piecing together Nick's mindset leading up to that Sunday. What had been going through his mind in the hours, days, and weeks before the deaths? His interactions with his parents were examined in meticulous detail. Digital communications, emails, text messages, and even private notes were scrutinized for any hint of motive or premeditation. Each detail was dissected for meaning. Had there been warning signs Romy or the family had missed? Or had the events unfolded in a way that no one could have predicted, a perfect storm of tension, secrecy, and hidden emotion? Romy wrestled with these questions. She replayed conversations in her mind, remembered moments where Nick's behavior had seemed odd, or where he had withdrawn from family interactions. Could those have been early signs of something darker? Or were they just normal behaviors, magnified in retrospect by tragedy? And yet, as she considered the letter from her father, she began to see hints of what Rob might have understood about his son's inner world. The subtle warnings embedded in the carefully worded lines, the advice and cautions that suggested Rob had been aware of tensions that no one else had considered. Nick's role in the story was more than just that of a son acting out. He was a puzzle piece in a family dynamic riddled with complexity. Investigators highlighted previous disagreements between him and his parents, moments of frustration that may have seemed trivial at the time but now gained new significance. Financial discussions, disputes over property, and even minor household conflicts were reevaluated in light of the events that had unfolded. Each incident painted a picture of a young man under pressure, navigating relationships he perhaps did not fully understand, and decisions that might have had unintended consequences. The investigation also revealed patterns of behavior that suggested Nick's emotional state had been volatile. Friends and acquaintances described moods that shifted quickly, moments of charm juxtaposed with periods of withdrawal or tension. Romy remembered seeing glimmers of that in her own interactions with him. The brother she had known could sometimes be distant, sometimes intense, sometimes almost unrecognizable from the person she had grown up with. And now, those patterns were being examined as part of the broader narrative of the family tragedy. Yet even as evidence was gathered, contradictions arose. Some communications suggested Nick had been planning his interactions carefully, while others indicated spontaneity, impulsiveness, or even confusion. Which version was accurate? Was Nick acting out of calculated intent, or was he overwhelmed by circumstances he could not control? Romy found herself torn between disbelief and the grim reality that the investigation was presenting. She wanted to see her brother as innocent, as the person she had known, but every piece of evidence complicated that narrative. Then there was the letter. Romy returned to it again and again, searching for guidance, for understanding, for insight into what her father might have known about Nick's mindset. Rob had written with precision, hinting at behaviors and decisions that, in retrospect, could explain tensions and possible conflicts. The words seemed almost prophetic, detailing scenarios that Romy could now interpret as warning signs or hints at potential outcomes. Each line became a clue in the puzzle of Nick's psychology, revealing not just actions but underlying motivations, emotional triggers, and unresolved conflicts. As the investigators delved deeper into Nick's digital footprint, his social media posts, emails, and other communications painted an even more complicated portrait. Some messages revealed vulnerability, loneliness, and frustration. Others suggested anger, secrecy, and a desire to assert control. Romy realized that the Nick she knew was just one layer, and that underneath lay complexities that even the family may not have fully grasped. Understanding him required parsing not just words and actions, but emotions, intentions, and a history of interactions that spanned years. In addition, forensic analysis of the timeline revealed gaps and inconsistencies that only deepened the mystery. How could events have unfolded so precisely? Was there premeditation? Were there external influences or pressures that had contributed to the tragedy? Romy struggled with these questions, seeking clarity in a story that seemed to defy simple explanation. Every detail added weight, every contradiction added tension, and every new revelation threatened to reshape her understanding of her family. But perhaps the most difficult realization for Romy was the emotional contradiction inherent in her feelings toward Nick. She loved her brother, that had not changed, and yet, she could not ignore the evidence, the implications, and the warnings embedded in her father's letter. How do you reconcile love with suspicion, memory with reality, and childhood perception with adult understanding? That was the burden Romy now carried, and it was a burden made heavier by the relentless scrutiny of investigators, media, and the public. As days passed, Romy noticed subtle patterns emerging in the investigation. Nick's actions, communications, and interactions with family members were being interpreted in multiple ways, each possibility carrying vastly different implications for the case. Was he a calculated actor, driven by hidden motives? Or was he reacting to a cascade of events beyond his control? The letter suggested that Rob had anticipated some kind of crisis, but its details left room for interpretation. Romy realized that understanding Nick's mind was central not just to comprehending the tragedy, but to predicting the next moves in a family now unmoored by grief and suspicion. And as Romy pieced together these fragments, the letter, the timeline, the behavioral patterns, she began to suspect that the truth was far more complex than anyone had imagined. Nick's motivations might be intertwined with hidden family dynamics, pressures from his environment, and secrets that Rob had only hinted at but never fully revealed. The realization was daunting. The events of that Sunday were not isolated, and the consequences of understanding or misinterpreting Nick's actions could ripple through the investigation, the family, and even the public narrative in ways no one could predict. Yet, even as Romy tried to process this, new information kept emerging. Small but significant clues that suggested Nick's role in the story was not yet fully understood. A late-night phone call, a cryptic text message, or a previously overlooked detail from the letter could shift everything. The complexity of his mind, his intentions, and his emotions made him both understandable and unknowable, a human puzzle wrapped in layers of love, anger, and secrecy. What do you do when the world you've known collapses in an instant? When the people you loved, the home you trusted, and the life you understood are all shattered at once. For Romy Reiner, that was the reality she faced in the days following the discovery of her parents' deaths, Nick's arrest, and the emergence of her father's mysterious letter. Every moment was a battle between disbelief, grief, and the urgent need to understand the unimaginable. Romy felt suspended in a strange limbo. On one hand, there was the harsh, inescapable reality. Her parents were gone. Rob Reiner, her father, the filmmaker, the guiding force in her life, and Michelle Reiner, her mother, her anchor, were both dead. On the other hand, there was the swirl of details that refused to fit neatly into any single narrative. The arrest of her brother Nick, the legal jeopardy facing her mother Tracy, and the cryptic contents of the letter that had arrived at a moment when clarity seemed impossible. The letter itself became both a lifeline and a source of torment. Romy reread it countless times, searching for guidance, for insight into her father's intentions, for hints about what to do next. Each line seemed to contain layers of meaning, subtle warnings about family dynamics, and veiled references to decisions that could have dire consequences if misinterpreted. Romy realized that understanding the letter was not just about deciphering words. It was about reconstructing a reality that had already begun to fracture around her. The emotional weight was almost unbearable. Romy oscillated between anger, sadness, confusion, and fear. She asked herself over and over, how could her family have hidden so much from her? How could things have escalated to this point without her noticing? And most pressing of all, what responsibility did she bear now that she had the letter, the key to secrets no one else fully understood? The answer was elusive, slipping away like sand through her fingers every time she thought she had grasped it. Friends and relatives tried to offer support, but Romy struggled to articulate the complexity of what she was feeling. How could she explain that the person she had always looked to for guidance, her mother, was now under investigation? That her brother, someone she had shared a lifetime of memories with, was accused of unimaginable acts? And that the letter her father had written, meant to be a bridge of understanding, seemed to carry more questions than answers? Complicating matters was the media frenzy surrounding the family. Headlines screamed of betrayal, scandal, and mystery. Social media speculated endlessly on motives, conflicts, and hidden truths. Every day, Romy was confronted with narratives she had no control over, stories that twisted her family's tragedy into entertainment. Each new article, each leaked piece of information, added to her confusion, making it harder to distinguish fact from speculation. At the same time, the investigation pressed forward, adding layers of complexity that Romy had never anticipated. Investigators questioned her repeatedly, asking for details about her relationships with her parents and brother, her observations of household tensions, and even her own behavior. Romy had to navigate these inquiries carefully, balancing the need to cooperate with her own fear of misinterpretation. One wrong word, one overlooked detail, could change the course of the investigation or the way her mother's actions were perceived. And then there was Nick. Every interaction Romy had with thoughts of her brother brought a cascade of conflicting emotions. She loved him deeply, yet she couldn't ignore the evidence. She wanted to believe in his innocence, in the brother she had known, but the charges against him, combined with the hints embedded in the letter, made that belief fragile. How do you reconcile love with fear, memory with suspicion, childhood familiarity with adult reality? Romy wrestled with these questions constantly, and the answers never felt complete. The letter itself offered only partial clarity. Rob's words hinted at potential motives, tensions, and hidden dynamics, but they left room for interpretation. Was he warning her about her brother, her mother, or both? Was he trying to prepare her for what she would face, or was he expressing fears he could never fully articulate? Each rereading of the letter revealed something new, a nuance, a double meaning, or a phrase that seemed insignificant at first but now carried weight. The closer Romy examined it, the more she realized how little she truly knew about her family's inner world. Amid the confusion, Romy experienced moments of intense emotional spikes. Memories of family dinners, birthday celebrations, and quiet conversations clashed with the horror of the crime scene, the media scrutiny, and the implications of the letter. She found herself questioning every memory, replaying interactions, and wondering if there had been signs she missed. Could she have prevented this? Could she have recognized the tension or intervened in some way? The questions were relentless, and the answers, if they existed, remained just out of reach. Adding to her turmoil was the realization that the letter contained more than just warnings, it contained choices. Rob had written not only about what had happened, but about what Romy might do in the aftermath. Should she trust her instincts or rely on investigators? Should she protect her mother or expose hidden truths? Every decision carried weight. Every action had potential consequences, and Romy felt the heavy responsibility of being the custodian of her father's final words. Meanwhile, the public narrative continued to spiral. Reporters speculated about motives, leaked information about investigations, and sensationalized every detail. Friends and acquaintances offered advice, often conflicting and confusing, adding to Romy's sense of disorientation. She realized that even those closest to her could not fully grasp the complexity of what she was facing, and that she alone had the responsibility to navigate the storm. And then came a moment that would crystallize her confusion and shock. A detective revealed that the letter contained subtle hints about Tracy's potential involvement, cryptic clues that Romy had not noticed before. The implications were staggering. Her mother, the woman who had raised and protected her, might not be entirely innocent in the eyes of the law. Romy felt a wave of disbelief, fear, and anger. How could this be? How could someone she loved so completely be implicated in something so horrifying? Romy realized that her journey through grief was just beginning. She had to navigate not only the loss of her parents, but also the complex legal, emotional, and moral terrain created by the letter and the investigation. Every day brought new revelations, new questions, and new challenges. And at every turn, the weight of responsibility pressed down on her, forcing her to confront truths she had never imagined she would face. The deeper she delved into the letter and the unfolding investigation, the more she understood that nothing in her family was as it seemed. Hidden alliances, unspoken conflicts, and long-buried secrets were emerging, each revelation adding to the sense of disorientation and urgency. Romy realized that understanding the full story would require courage, insight, and perhaps a willingness to face truths she had long avoided. Have you ever felt the walls closing in, not just from grief or confusion, but from the glare of a world watching your every move? That was the reality for Romy Reiner as the story of her family's tragedy exploded into the public sphere. What had been a deeply personal horror, the deaths of her parents and the arrest of her brother, suddenly became a spectacle, consumed voraciously by the media, social platforms, and millions of viewers hungry for scandal. The quiet, private heartbreak that Romy had tried to process in the sanctuary of the Brentwood estate was now on display for the world to dissect. From the moment Nick's arrest was reported, reporters camped outside the estate, cameras focused, microphones ready, capturing every tear, every hesitant word. Headlines screamed with shock, Hollywood horror. Son arrested in Reiner family tragedy. Secrets and betrayal in the Reiner household. Letter from father sparks arrest of Tracy Reiner. Social media erupted. with hashtags trending almost instantly, turning the family's pain into a public spectacle. Each article, each viral post, was a new wave crashing against Romy's fragile emotional state. The frenzy wasn't just local, it became global. International media outlets picked up the story, analyzing every possible angle. Was this a case of premeditation? Was Tracy Reiner truly implicated? Could Nick's actions have been influenced by hidden family tensions, financial disputes, or even Hollywood connections? Analysts, bloggers, and insiders all offered their own theories, often contradictory and sensational, leaving Romy in a haze of confusion. She couldn't escape the scrutiny, no matter where she turned. Every interaction, every outing, even her silence, was interpreted as a sign, a statement, a clue. Meanwhile, the public reaction was relentless. Fans of Rob Reiner expressed shock and disbelief, struggling to reconcile the beloved filmmaker's image with the horror of the crime. Hollywood colleagues whispered and speculated. The media frenzy also amplified the complexity of the investigation. Journalists reported leaks from court documents, police statements, and even anonymous sources within the Reiner household. Rumors circulated about financial disputes, past conflicts, and hidden family dynamics. Every new piece of information, no matter how small or speculative, was treated as a potential clue, escalating public interest and complicating the family's efforts to maintain privacy. Romy was caught in a storm she could neither escape nor control. Social media, in particular, played a brutal role. Hashtags like #ReinerFamilyScandal and #HollywoodTragedy trended for days, with millions of people discussing, analyzing, and often speculating wildly about the motives and actions of the family members. Conspiracy theories proliferated, some suggesting that Nick had acted alone, others claiming Tracy had orchestrated events, and a few proposing that the letter contained hidden messages only insiders could decode. Romy found herself reading comments, tweets, and posts that dissected her family's history in ways that felt invasive and relentless. At the same time, public outrage intensified. People questioned how a family with so much wealth, fame, and perceived stability could be torn apart so completely. The story became a mirror for societal fascination with celebrity, scandal, and the dark undercurrents of private lives. Romy watched as friends and strangers alike debated morality, responsibility, and culpability, all while the investigation continued behind closed doors. It was a surreal and unsettling experience, blending grief with the surreal absurdity of public consumption of tragedy. The letter, meanwhile, remained a focal point. Journalists speculated about its contents, sometimes misinterpreting lines or exaggerating implications for dramatic effect. Every revelation about the letter's role in Tracy's arrest was amplified, feeding the frenzy and heightening Romy's sense of responsibility. She felt the weight of knowing something that the world wanted to speculate on but didn't yet fully understand. Her father's words had become both a lifeline and a source of intense pressure. The bridge between private truth and public narrative. Romy also had to navigate the complex emotions stirred by the public's reaction. There was fear, anger, and grief, of course, but there was also a sense of betrayal, not by the family, but by the world outside it. How could people watch, comment, and theorize while the family suffered in private? Yet she knew that in this age, privacy was almost impossible for those in the public eye, and the Reiner story was now global property. Every news segment, every social media post, every headline was a reminder that personal tragedy had become entertainment. Even as Romy tried to focus on understanding her father's letter, the media storm made it difficult to think clearly. She felt constantly observed, constantly judged, and constantly pressured to act or respond. Every interaction she had, with investigators, family, or friends, was now potentially scrutinized for how it might appear in the public eye. This new reality forced her to become hyper-aware of every word, every gesture, every decision, a skill that was emotionally draining and often terrifying. And yet, amid the frenzy, Romy realized that there were glimmers of clarity. The chaos of public opinion highlighted the importance of relying on facts, on the evidence, and on her own instincts. She began to parse the media noise carefully, separating speculation from verified information, and using that to guide her understanding of the investigation the letter, and her family. It was a delicate balance, staying informed without being consumed, and one that would define the next steps she took in navigating this nightmare. But the most unsettling aspect of the media frenzy was how quickly it could change the narrative. One misquoted phrase, one misinterpreted action, and public perception could shift in an instant. Romy felt the fragility of truth in a world where sensationalism reigned, and she realized that controlling her family's story, even in the smallest way, might be her only path to preserving some semblance of justice and clarity. And just when Romy thought the world's gaze was overwhelming enough, new evidence emerged that threatened to magnify the scandal even further. Details from the letter, hints of secrets long buried, and suggestions of hidden motivations all began to leak into the press, intentionally or otherwise. The public's appetite for answers was insatiable, and the Reiner family, already reeling, was now at the center of an ever-intensifying storm. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. What happens when the line between love and suspicion blurs so completely that the person you've always trusted becomes the focus of an investigation? That was the reality for Tracy Reiner as the legal storm around her intensified. The quiet elegance and composure she had always projected were no match for the scrutiny of investigators, prosecutors, and the media. Overnight, she became both a suspect and a symbol. The matriarch under fire, accused, and interrogated while her family watched, helpless and anxious, as her life unraveled before their eyes. Tracy's arrest was sudden, a flashpoint in a saga that already seemed uncontainable. Investigators, armed with the revelations from Rob Reiner's letter, alleged that her actions and knowledge could have contributed to the tragedy. The letter had hinted at choices made in secrecy, subtle conflicts, and hidden responsibilities that seemed to point directly, if ambiguously, toward her. And though nothing in the document explicitly accused her, law enforcement believed it suggested a level of complicity, or at least knowledge, that warranted arrest and questioning. The charges against Tracy were complex. Authorities were not just examining potential participation in the events themselves, but also her role in the family dynamics leading up to the deaths. Had she failed to act? Had she influenced outcomes in ways that, though perhaps unintentional, escalated the situation? Every interaction with investigators became a minefield, where a misstep could be interpreted as guilt, and every silence, every pause, seemed to weigh against her. For Romy, watching her mother navigate this storm was emotionally devastating. She had grown up seeing Tracy as unshakable, the glue that held the family together. Now, Romy saw her mother's poise tested in ways she had never imagined. The courtroom, the police questioning, and the relentless media scrutiny exposed Tracy to pressures Romy feared she would never recover from. It was a cruel irony. The woman who had once shielded the family from scandal now became the focal point of it. Legal experts dissected every word of the letter, analyzing how Rob's phrasing could be interpreted as evidence against Tracy. Did his warnings indicate awareness of her involvement? Were they meant to protect Romy from secrets she wasn't ready to handle? Or were they simply observations, misinterpreted by investigators desperate for context? The ambiguity fueled the legal storm, leaving both Tracy and Romy trapped in a whirlwind of accusation, speculation, and fear. As the investigation deepened, previously private details about Tracy's life were scrutinized. Her interactions with Nick, her responses to past family conflicts, and even financial decisions came under the microscope. Investigators sought patterns, inconsistencies, and potential motives. Every detail became evidence, every statement a puzzle piece. Romy struggled to reconcile the mother she knew with the narrative being constructed in courtrooms and newsrooms alike. Could someone so devoted and caring truly be implicated in events that led to the death of her husband and the chaos surrounding Nick? The courtroom became an arena where the family's private history was dissected in public. Lawyers argued, witnesses testified, and every nuance was analyzed. Romy found herself reliving memories with new awareness. Conversations that had seemed trivial, moments of tension or disagreement, decisions made quietly behind closed doors. All of it now mattered. All of it became a potential clue in determining Tracy's role in the tragedy. The emotional toll was enormous. Tracy herself maintained a careful, measured stance. Her statements were precise, cautious, designed to avoid misinterpretation, but the pressure was unrelenting. Investigators and prosecutors probed relentlessly, seeking inconsistencies or admissions that could strengthen their case. Romy watched as her mother navigated this minefield, torn between admiration for her composure and fear for what could happen next. Every day brought new developments, new evidence, new witnesses, and new public scrutiny. Meanwhile, the media continued to escalate the frenzy. Every legal motion, every court appearance, every snippet from the letter was amplified, interpreted, and broadcast. Rumors ran rampant, speculation became narrative, and the public's appetite for drama seemed insatiable. For Romy, every report was a new wave of anxiety, every headline a reminder that her mother's innocence or guilt was being debated on a global stage. She felt the isolation keenly, trapped between grief, family responsibility, and the relentless gaze of the world. But there were also contradictions in the case. Some evidence suggested Tracy had acted to protect her children, to manage conflicts, and to prevent escalation. Other details hinted at decisions that could be construed as negligent or even complicit. The tension between these interpretations created an atmosphere of uncertainty and fear, leaving Romy struggling to reconcile the woman she knew with the legal portrait being painted. Could her mother truly be guilty? Or was she simply a scapegoat caught in the crossfire of circumstance, letter, and tragedy? Romy began to see the larger picture. The legal storm was not just about actions taken, but about perception, interpretation, and the power of narrative. Tracy's arrest was not only a legal event. It was a test of family, loyalty, and the ability to navigate truth in a world where appearances often outweigh facts. Every move, every word, every hesitation was now magnified, and Romy realized that the consequences of missteps could reverberate far beyond the courtroom. Adding to the pressure was the continuing revelation of hidden family dynamics. The letter hinted at decisions, alliances, and conflicts that had long been invisible to outsiders. Romy now understood that the tragedy was not a single event, but the culmination of years of tension, secrecy, and unresolved conflicts. Tracy's legal challenges were a reflection of these deeper complexities, a storm generated by patterns that had been hidden in plain sight. And as Romy watched the legal storm intensify, she began to realize the stakes were even higher than she had imagined. The outcomes of these proceedings could redefine the family, alter public perception, and even affect the legacy of her father's name. Every decision she made, every interpretation she offered, carried weight. The letter had been her father's warning, but it was now also her compass, guiding her through a labyrinth of grief, uncertainty, and scrutiny. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. What happens when the line between love and suspicion blurs so completely that the person you've always trusted becomes the focus of an investigation? That was the reality for Tracy Reiner as the legal storm around her intensified. The quiet elegance and composure she had always projected were no match for the scrutiny of investigators, prosecutors, and the media. Overnight, she became both a suspect and a symbol. The matriarch under fire, accused, and interrogated while her family watched, helpless and anxious, as her life unraveled before their eyes. Tracy's arrest was sudden, a flashpoint in a saga that already seemed uncontainable. Investigators, armed with the revelations from Rob Reiner's letter, alleged that her actions and knowledge could have contributed to the tragedy. The letter had hinted at choices made in secrecy, subtle conflicts, and hidden responsibilities that seemed to point directly, if ambiguously, toward her. And though nothing in the document explicitly accused her, law enforcement believed it suggested a level of complicity, or at least knowledge, that warranted arrest and questioning. The charges against Tracy were complex. Authorities were not just examining potential participation in the events themselves, but also her role in the family dynamics leading up to the deaths. Had she failed to act? Had she influenced outcomes in ways that, though perhaps unintentional, escalated the situation? Every interaction with investigators became a minefield, where a misstep could be interpreted as guilt, and every silence, every pause, seemed to weigh against her. For Romy, watching her mother navigate this storm was emotionally devastating. She had grown up seeing Tracy as unshakable, the glue that held the family together. Now, Romy saw her mother's poise tested in ways she had never imagined. The courtroom, the police questioning, and the relentless media scrutiny exposed Tracy to pressures Romy feared she would never recover from. It was a cruel irony. The woman who had once shielded the family from scandal now became the focal point of it. Legal experts dissected every word of the letter, analyzing how Rob's phrasing could be interpreted as evidence against Tracy. Did his warnings indicate awareness of her involvement? Were they meant to protect Romy from secrets she wasn't ready to handle? Or were they simply observations, misinterpreted by investigators desperate for context? The ambiguity fueled the legal storm, leaving both Tracy and Romy trapped in a whirlwind of accusation, speculation, and fear. As the investigation deepened, previously private details about Tracy's life were scrutinized. Her interactions with Nick, her responses to past family conflicts, and even financial decisions came under the microscope. Investigators sought patterns, inconsistencies, and potential motives. Every detail became evidence, every statement a puzzle piece. Romy struggled to reconcile the mother she knew with the narrative being constructed in courtrooms and newsrooms alike. Could someone so devoted and caring truly be implicated in events that led to the death of her husband and the chaos surrounding Nick? The courtroom became an arena where the family's private history was dissected in public. Lawyers argued, witnesses testified, and every nuance was analyzed. Romy found herself reliving memories with new awareness. Conversations that had seemed trivial, moments of tension or disagreement, decisions made quietly behind closed doors. All of it now mattered. All of it became a potential clue in determining Tracy's role in the tragedy. The emotional toll was enormous. Tracy herself maintained a careful, measured stance. Her statements were precise, cautious, designed to avoid misinterpretation, but the pressure was unrelenting. Investigators and prosecutors probed relentlessly, seeking inconsistencies or admissions that could strengthen their case. Romy watched as her mother navigated this minefield, torn between admiration for her composure and fear for what could happen next. Every day brought new developments, new evidence, new witnesses, and new public scrutiny. Meanwhile, the media continued to escalate the frenzy. Every legal motion, every court appearance, every snippet from the letter was amplified, interpreted, and broadcast. Rumors ran rampant, speculation became narrative, and the public's appetite for drama seemed insatiable. For Romy, every report was a new wave of anxiety, every headline a reminder that her mother's innocence or guilt was being debated on a global stage. She felt the isolation keenly, trapped between grief, family responsibility, and the relentless gaze of the world. But there were also contradictions in the case. Some evidence suggested Tracy had acted to protect her children, to manage conflicts, and to prevent escalation. Other details hinted at decisions that could be construed as negligent or even complicit. The tension between these interpretations created an atmosphere of uncertainty and fear, leaving Romy struggling to reconcile the woman she knew with the legal portrait being painted. Could her mother truly be guilty? Or was she simply a scapegoat caught in the crossfire of circumstance, letter, and tragedy? Romy began to see the larger picture. The legal storm was not just about actions taken, but about perception, interpretation, and the power of narrative. Tracy's arrest was not only a legal event. It was a test of family, loyalty, and the ability to navigate truth in a world where appearances often outweigh facts. Every move, every word, every hesitation was now magnified, and Romy realized that the consequences of missteps could reverberate far beyond the courtroom. Adding to the pressure was the continuing revelation of hidden family dynamics. The letter hinted at decisions, alliances, and conflicts that had long been invisible to outsiders. Romy now understood that the tragedy was not a single event, but the culmination of years of tension, secrecy, and unresolved conflicts. Tracy's legal challenges were a reflection of these deeper complexities, a storm generated by patterns that had been hidden in plain sight. And as Romy watched the legal storm intensify, she began to realize the stakes were even higher than she had imagined. The outcomes of these proceedings could redefine the family, alter public perception, and even affect the legacy of her father's name. Every decision she made, every interpretation she offered, carried weight. The letter had been her father's warning, but it was now also her compass, guiding her through a labyrinth of grief, uncertainty, and scrutiny. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. What if everything you thought you knew about your family was just the surface? What if beneath the smiling photographs, holiday gatherings, and carefully curated appearances lay a web of secrets so intricate that it could explain tragedies no one had anticipated? For Romy Reiner, the days following the deaths of her parents and the arrest of her brother Nick were not just about grief. They were about uncovering a hidden world, one that her father's letter had only begun to reveal. The letter had hinted at tensions, unspoken grievances, and decisions that had been made quietly, in rooms no outsider could access. As Romy reread Rob Reiner's words, the pieces of the family's hidden puzzle began to emerge. There were subtle references to conflicts over inheritance, cryptic mentions of arguments no one outside the household had witnessed, and vague allusions to alliances that had shifted over time. Every line suggested that the family's external image of harmony was a carefully constructed facade. Romy started piecing together moments she had once dismissed. Disagreements between Nick and her parents over financial choices now seemed loaded with subtext. Conversations that had once seemed trivial. Arguments over the management of the estate, disputes about private property, tensions regarding household responsibilities, now hinted at deeper resentments. It became clear that the tragedy was not an isolated incident, but the culmination of years of simmering conflicts, carefully concealed from public view. And then there were secrets that even Romy had never fully understood, elements of the family's history that Rob had alluded to in his letter. Romy realized that her father had,